In 1978, Philips released the Magnavox Odyssey 2. To make up for the lack of third-party support, several knockoff games were made, including KC Munchkin. This title was similar to Pac-Man, but there's several differences that make it stand out. Here's the big question: if you make enough changes to a game, can you avoid copyright issues? Or does it not matter? Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Podrez coming at you with another video. Alright, so if you've seen a few of my videos and you like what I do, hit that subscribe button right there. And check out our Discord server, discord.podrez.net, or click on the link in the description. Alright, let's talk about the Magnavox Odyssey.
The electronic game of the future. Odyssey easily attaches to any brand TV, black and white or color, to create a closed-circuit electronic playground. Odyssey gives you all the exciting action of hockey and 11 other challenging play and learning games for the entire family.
Before video game consoles, TVs were used for just one thing: watching whatever's on the screen. But outside of changing the channel, the user had no control over what was actually happening on screen. It's a TV show, after all. But the engineer, Ralph Baer, had an idea. What if the user could do more than just change the station? Baer envisioned a box that plugged into the TV and played games, all for $25. While video games technically did exist, they were built using expensive hardware and were only found in research institutions. To make one for only $25 was unheard of. After building multiple prototypes and discussing ideas for games, it was clear that $25 as the retail price would not be possible. Baer also had difficulties finding a company that wanted to get on board. The company Teleprompter Corporation initially agreed to market the product, but they backed out shortly afterwards. RCA expressed interest in marketing the product as well, but an agreement could not be reached. Finally, Magnavox stepped in and agreed to produce and sell Baer's console. Magnavox's own engineers would redesign the console and call it the Odyssey. The console would be released in 1971, making it the first home console ever made. The asking price was $99.95, almost quadruple what Baer originally wanted. If you thought the Atari 2600 was primitive, you haven't seen nothing yet. The Odyssey is only capable of displaying 3 dots in a vertical line. They were cartridges, but they didn't hold any data. Instead, the Odyssey had built-in games, and the cartridges just helped switch between them. The games all came with an overlay that you had to put on the TV screen. So yeah, this was definitely a very simplistic console. It hardly qualifies as a home console, but it's impressive that Baer took what was previously only in research institutions and turned it into a small $99 unit. There were a few other aspects besides the limited hardware that held the Odyssey back. The console was only sold at Magnavox dealers, which limited its footprint. It's hard to sell a console if not that many places have it. Some consumers also thought that you could only use it on Magnavox TVs. Some sales agents even misled customers into believing this so that they could get a TV sale. Due to inflation, the cost of producing the Odyssey would increase. To avoid increasing the retail price of the console, Magnavox and Texas Instruments teamed up and built a new iteration using cheaper parts. The result would be the Odyssey 100 and 200, both of which were Pong consoles that did not take cartridges. The original console was discontinued as a result. Home consoles that accepted cartridges would be tested out over the years. For example, the Fairchild Channel F was the first game console to accept ROM cartridges. Each game was actually brand new, not just built in. The Channel F would lay down the foundation for an even better console to come out, the Atari 2600. This console plugged into the TV and took cartridges just like the Odyssey, but each game contained its own program and didn't need overlays on the TV screen. The Odyssey could never have more than 20 or so games because they were all built in, but with Atari's cartridge ROMs, there was unlimited potential for games. Initially, Atari started out by porting over their arcade titles, but the console moved away from basic titles like Pong, and we started seeing some more advanced games. The ability to play cartridge ROMs on a home console became the industry standard. More companies would follow suit, including Magnavox themselves. With the success of the 2600, Magnavox, who is now under the parent company Philips, would drop their name in the hat one more time. They adapted to the new standards and began development of a home console that took cartridge ROMs. The end result would be the Odyssey 2. The console had a keyboard that was built in, which was nice for selecting gameplay variations and playing educational games. The hardware wasn't much better than Atari's console. The Odyssey 2 had 64 bytes of internal CPU RAM and 128 bytes of external CPU RAM. The 2600 had just 128 bytes of RAM, so it is a small improvement. Cartridges typically carried anywhere from 2 kilobytes to 8 kilobytes of ROM space, which is right in line with Atari games. Magnavox managed to build something that was like the 2600, but didn't outright beat it. But anyone who watches me knows that better hardware does not mean a better console. If you have a great lineup of games, you can still have a successful console. The Odyssey had very limited third-party support though. Imagic released 2 of their titles, Atlantis and Demon Attack. Parker Brothers brought over a few arcade classics like Frogger, Popeye, and Q-Bert, but these were only 2 companies. To make up for the lackluster third-party support, several games were knockoff of well-established titles. With that said, let's play a few games. Let's try Alien Invaders. It's an obvious Space Invaders clone, but there's some interesting differences. If you get hit, you lose your ship, but you can obtain another one at the cost of one of your bunkers. In human form, you're not able to shoot, and if you lose all your bunkers, you can no longer progress and have to wait for an enemy to kill you. The bottom invaders cannot be destroyed, so you have to shoot around them. This is an obvious attempt at cashing in on the popularity of Space Invaders, but Philippe did manage to make it their own. Speaking of clones, Philippe did publish a decent amount of them to make up for the poor lineup of games. In Jumping Acrobats, you guide a circus clown towards the balloons to pop every single one. This bears a strong resemblance to Circus Atari. In Gunfighter, you play against your friend and must shoot them before they shoot you. This is strikingly similar to Outlaw by Atari. Here's Cosmic Conflict. It's a first-person space shooter where you must destroy all the enemies to win. The number on the left is how many enemies are remaining, and on the right is your time limit. Each time you shoot, you lose some extra time, so you have to make sure every bullet counts. If you run out of bullets, you lose. The game has very smooth multi-directional scrolling, which is amazing for a second-generation console. The controls could be better though. It's very difficult to line up shots, especially against enemies that move diagonally. While there's not much to it, I do gotta be fair, this is a decent game considering it came out in 1978. Here's Turtles. It's a maze game where you must collect the baby turtles and bring them to their home. You can only carry one at a time, and the house will not be in the same place each time. The enemies will destroy you in one hit, but you can drop a bomb that temporarily stuns them. However, you have to be careful where you drop them because you can't use more than one at a time, and once you drop it on the level, you can't discard it. This was originally an arcade game by Konami that's very underrated. The game didn't receive a lot of console ports, so it's definitely a point for Philippe that the Odyssey 2 got this one. This is a fantastic game that no one talks about. Let's take a look at a couple of Parker Brothers games. In Q-Bert, you must color in all the cubes, or in this version rectangles, to beat the stage. The Atari version at least tried to draw in the cubes, this one didn't even bother. In most versions of the game, the controls are set up so that if you press down, you move diagonally southeast. But in this version, you actually do have to press diagonally to make your character move in that direction. I actually do prefer this because it can be confusing with the other control scheme. This is an alright version, especially if you prefer the control setup, but the graphics are lazier. They went in an interesting direction with Frogger. The road section is now on a separate screen from the water section. This is an unusual change, but it might have been so they could draw more detailed graphics. It does look a little better than the 2600 version, and the game doesn't flicker like that one does. It's hard to line up your jumps in this one because your character seems to jump 1.5 tiles instead of just one. Overall though, I actually do prefer this version over the 2600 one. While this console didn't receive a lot of third-party support, Parker Brothers and Imagic did bring over some of their absolute best titles. From what the game library was missing, Philippe made up for it by developing knockoff versions. For the most part, these copycat versions were different enough to avoid legal issues. However, that was not the case with one game. Considering Pac-Man was one of the most successful arcade games ever made, Philippe developed their own iteration of it. Here's Casey Munchkin. The goal is the same, you must collect all the dots to avoid the enemies, which are called munchies. You can eat the special dot which gives you the ability to destroy the munchies. To avoid potential lawsuits, Philippe made some changes to the formula. The dots actually move in this version, and there's far less of them than in Pac-Man. There's also a rotating platform which connects certain segments of the level together. You also don't move automatically. If you don't press any direction, your character stays in place, unlike Pac-Man. The game also has multiple levels, not just one, and even has a randomizer. You can even build your own levels, which is a nice addition. Philippe managed to take the Pac-Man formula and make it their own. It seems like they made enough changes to differentiate this version from Pac-Man, but Atari, who had the home console license to Pac-Man, didn't think so. They took Philippe to court, claiming that KC Munchkin was copyright infringement. This exhibit was filed by Atari, which pointed out the similarities between Pac-Man and KC Munchkin. The characters do look similar, and the premise of the game is exactly the same, but do the differences in KC Munchkin protect it from copyright infringement? The court initially thought yes. Atari was not able to prove that Philippe copied Pac-Man or had access to it. Philippe won the case, but it didn't last for long. Atari would appeal the case, and this time they would win. Despite the loss, Philippe developed a sequel called Casey's Crazy Chase. Here, rather than eating all the dots, you must eat the caterpillar's body to advance to the next level. This time, your character faces the center and rotates around instead of chomping, most likely to avoid being compared to Pac-Man. There's also no power pellets or dots to be collected. The caterpillar looks similar to Atari's Centipede, which was most likely intentional. This time around, Philippe made enough changes to the formula to avoid copyright issues. Looking back on the case, it's interesting that Atari went after Philippe for this when it's not the first Atari property to be copied. Why didn't they go after Philippe for jumping acrobats? It's probably because Pac-Man was such a successful game, and Atari had the only official home console version of it. In my opinion, KC Munchkin was different enough to not be copyright infringement. I'm very surprised the court favored Atari because, as far as I know, it's not illegal to make a game that has some similarities to another one. Unfortunately, the Odyssey 2 struggled to compete against the other home consoles. It was hardly any better than the 2600, and later consoles like the Intellivision would blow it out of the water. The console didn't have any third-party support besides Magic and Parker Brothers. Philippe was forced to make copycat versions of games, which unfortunately resulted in a lawsuit. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.